My name is Alina Carter. I am 31 years old. 5 years ago, my husband told me to pack my things and leave before sunrise. Not because he caught me cheating, not because I stole money, not because I did anything wrong. He believed his sister, and that belief cost me my home, my marriage, and every person who used to call me family. 5 years later, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, that same husband stood in line at the counter of the bakery I built from nothing. He didn't recognize me at first, but when he did, the color drained from his face the same way it had drained from mine the night he closed the door behind me. Before I take you back to how everything broke, I want to ask you something. Have you ever tried to defend yourself while the people you love had already decided you were guilty? That's what this was. Not a fight, not an argument, a verdict. And I wasn't in the room when it was delivered. Let me take you back to the night it happened. It was November, cold, wind, pressing against the kitchen windows. I was standing at the stove, stirring tomato soup, when my husband, Daniel, walked in with his jaw tight and his phone in his hand. He didn't say hello, he didn't take off his coat. He just said, "We need to talk." I turned off the stove. About what? About the money, he said. There it was, the accusation. 2 days earlier, Daniel's sister Marissa had discovered that $5,000 were missing from the joint savings account. Money we were setting aside for a down payment on a bigger house. Money I had never touched. Marissa had access to Daniel's banking app because he trusted her with everything. She said she saw a transfer to an unknown account. She said it came from my login. She said she didn't want to believe it. She said she was worried. Marissa had always been worried about me. Worried I wasn't ambitious enough. Worried I didn't dress well enough. Worried I was holding Daniel back. She had opinions about everything. And Daniel listened to her like she was a second mother. "Daniel," I said slowly, "we already talked about this. I didn't move any money." He put his phone on the counter and slid it toward me. "There's the transfer." I looked at the screen. $5,000. Transferred to an account I didn't recognize. Date and time, 11:42 p.m. The night. I had fallen asleep on the couch watching a cooking show. "That's not me," I said. "It says your login," he replied. "It's not me." Marissa wouldn't lie. That sentence, that one sentence, that was the moment I knew I was losing. Not because of money. Because of loyalty. He didn't say, "Let's call the bank." He didn't say, "Let's check the IP address." He didn't say, "Maybe there's a mistake." He said, "Marissa wouldn't lie." And that meant he thought I would. You have to understand something about Marissa. She was 3 years older than Daniel. She had raised him after their mom passed away. She was protective, controlling, proud of it. When Daniel and I got engaged, she pulled me aside at the engagement party and said, "Take care of him. He trusts you easily." What she meant was, don't try to replace me. For 3 years of marriage, she inserted herself into everything. Holiday plans, budget decisions, even our arguments. Daniel would tell her things I said in private. She would give him advice. He would come back and repeat her words, like they were scripture. I told myself it was harmless. I told myself she just loved him. I was wrong. That night in the kitchen, Daniel's voice got colder. "Just admit it," he said. "If you needed money, we could have talked." I didn't take it. "So you're calling my sister a liar?" I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger, something worse. Helplessness. "I'm saying someone is wrong," I said quietly. "And it's not me." He laughed once. Sharp. $5,000 doesn't just disappear. I know. "Then explain it." "I can't explain something I didn't do." Silence, heavy, then he said it. "If you can't be honest with me, I don't know how we move forward." I stared at him. "You're serious?" "Yes." "You're choosing her word over mine." "I'm choosing the evidence." No, he wasn't. He was choosing comfort. It was easier to believe I had betrayed him than to believe his sister could. Because if she lied, his entire foundation cracked, and he wasn't ready to look at that. The argument lasted 3 hours. Voices raised, tears. Accusations. I asked him to call the bank. He said he would in the morning. but his tone told me he already had his answer. At midnight, he stood in the bedroom doorway and said, "Maybe you should stay somewhere else for a while." I blinked. "What?" "Just until this gets sorted." "You think I stole from you?" "I think you did something you're not telling me." My hands started shaking. "I'm your wife, and I'm trying to protect my family." "Protect Dot from me." I packed a suitcase in silence, not because I believed I had done something wrong, but because staying would mean begging, and I refused to beg to be believed. At 3 a.m., I walked past him, sitting on the couch. He didn't look at me. He said, "I hope you think about what you've done." I stopped. I wanted to scream. Instead, I said, "I hope one day you think about what you've just done." Then I walked out. He didn't follow. I had $213 in my checking account. My parents lived 2 states away and thought Daniel was perfect. I didn't want to call them, so I drove to the only place open at that hour, a 24-hour diner off the highway. I sat in a booth with my suitcase next to me and ordered coffee I couldn't afford at 4:12 a.m. My phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "We need space. I'm changing the account passwords." That was it. Not "Are you safe?" Not "Call me." Just passwords. He locked me out of our joint life before the sun came up. 2 days later, divorce papers arrived at the motel I had checked into with what little money I had left. Grounds: financial betrayal and breach of trust. Marissa had helped him find a lawyer. I know because her name was on the paperwork as a witness to financial discrepancies. She had signed her name neatly under a lie. I stared at that signature for a long time. I realized something important that day. This was never about $5,000. It was about control, and I was the easiest piece to remove. I tried to fight it. I went to the bank myself. I demanded transaction logs, IP, the address tracking. They confirmed something strange. The transfer had been initiated from a device linked to Daniel's family plan, not mine. When I told Daniel, he said I was manipulating information. When I suggested Marissa might have used his phone, he said I was desperate. By the time the forensic report came back officially, Daniel had already filed for divorce. He didn't want to hear it, because hearing it would mean admitting he destroyed his marriage over a lie, and pride is expensive, more expensive than $5,000. The divorce was finalized in 4 months. I walked out of the courthouse with a single box of my belongings. Marissa stood beside Daniel the entire time, like she had won something. And in a way, she had. She got her brother back, but she also planted something else. Doubt, it just hadn't grown yet. The first year after the divorce was not inspiring. It wasn't empowering. It wasn't cinematic. It was humiliating. I moved into a small rented room above a hair salon. I worked 2 jobs. Morning shift at a grocery store bakery, evening shift cleaning offices. I learned the exact weight of flour bags, the exact smell of yeast at 5 a.m. The exact ache in your hands after scrubbing floors for 4 hours. There is nothing glamorous about starting over. There is no music playing in the background. There is just exhaustion and choice. Quit or build. I chose build, not to prove him wrong. Not at first. To survive. But something changed around year 2. The bakery manager where I worked noticed I stayed late. Not because I had to, because I wanted to learn. I asked about cost margins, supplier contracts, profit per item, waste percentages. She started teaching me. I started experimenting with recipes. My cinnamon rolls sold out. First, then my sourdoughh. Customers asked for me by name. Alina's bread. That's what they started calling it for the first time in a long time. Something was mine. By year 3, I had saved enough to rent a tiny storefront downtown. It used to be a florist shop. The walls still smelled faintly like old roses. I painted them myself, cream and warm brown. I bought secondhand ovens. I worked from 4 a.m. to 7 p.m. I slept on a mattress in the back office for the first 6 months. There were days I sold $12 total. There were days I cried in the walk-in fridge, but I kept going. Not because I was strong, because I had nothing else to go back to. On the day I hung the sign above the door, I stood across the street and stared at it. Carter's Bread & Co. My last name, not his, mine. I felt something settle inside. Me. Not revenge, not yet independence. And independence is quiet, but powerful. 5 years passed. The bakery grew. We added coffee, then sandwiches, then outdoor seating. We hired staff. People trusted me, respected me, asked my advice. The girl who was once accused of stealing $5,000 now handled payroll for 8 employees. Life is strange like that. And then, one rainy Thursday afternoon, the bell above the bakery door rang. I was behind the counter, hair tied back, flour on my apron. A man stepped in, shaking water off his jacket. I didn't look up at first. I was wrapping a loaf of sourdough. Then I heard his voice. 2 cinnamon rolls and a black coffee, please. My hands froze. I looked up. Daniel, older. Thinner lines around his mouth. I didn't recognize. He looked tired. He didn't recognize me, not immediately. He scanned the menu. I said, "That'll be $8.75. He reached for his wallet. Then he looked at my face, and everything stopped. His hand trembled slightly. "Alina." I smiled politely. "Welcome to Carter's Bread & Co." The silence between us felt exactly like the silence the night I packed my suitcase. But this time, I wasn't the one standing outside. Daniel stood at the counter like someone who had just stepped into the past by accident. His eyes moved from my face to the sign behind me, then to the display case filled with fresh bread. He looked at the staff member beside me, then back at me. "You own this?" he asked quietly. "I do." There are moments in life when silence is louder than shouting. This was one of them. 5 years ago, he had looked at me like I was capable of betrayal. Now he was looking at me like he had miscalculated. Something important. Behind him, 2 customers waited patiently. Rain tapped softly against the front window. I rang up his order. The register beeped. Normal sounds, ordinary afternoon. But inside my chest, old memories were moving. Not anger, not pain, recognition. This was the first time since the divorce that I was not the smaller person in the room. And I did not need to prove anything. "Are you back in town?" I asked calmly. He nodded. Double quotes. "Yeah, for a while." "For work?" "Something like that." His voice had lost its certainty. The Daniel I used to know spoke firmly. This version hesitated. I handed him the receipt. "We close at 6. I said. He didn't move. "Can we talk?" 5 years ago, I would have agreed instantly. I would have hoped for explanation, for apology, for validation. Now I simply said, "I have work." He looked around the bakery. The shelves were half empty because it was late afternoon. The chalkboard menu listed specials in my handwriting. The smell of fresh bread filled the space. "You built this," he said. "Yes." "How?" I started. He swallowed. "Can I come back after closing?" I considered it, not because I owed him anything, but because something in his expression told me this was not a coincidence. 6:15, I said. Then I turned to the next customer, and that was that. The bell rang as he left. I watched through the window as he stood on the sidewalk for a moment before walking down the street. He looked smaller. Then I remembered, not physically, emotionally. I wiped the counter slowly. Maria, one of my employees, leaned toward me. "You know him," she whispered, double quotes. "Yes, sex, yes." She raised her eyebrows. "Interesting." I smiled faintly. "Yes, it is." When 6 o'clock came, we closed like always. Chairs stacked, floors swept, cash counted. Routine steadies you. Routine reminds you who you are now, at 6:15 exactly. There was a knock on the door. I unlocked it. Daniel stepped in the bakery. Looked different at night. Softer. Quieter. Without customers. It felt more personal. He stood awkwardly near the counter. "You look good," he said. "I'm doing well." That's good. Silence again then. He said the thing I knew was coming. I was wrong. The words hung there, simple, heavy. I waited, he continued. I should have listened to you about the money. Yes, I said. He flinched slightly. At how calmly I agreed. I know that now. Why now? I asked. He exhaled slowly, because Marissa confessed. The room felt still. I didn't react outwardly, but something inside me shifted. Confess to what? I asked, even though I already knew. She transferred the money. How she had access to my phone, to my banking app. She said she was trying to protect me. From what? He looked ashamed. From you. I let that settle between us. She said she thought you were going to leave me eventually, that you weren't serious about building a life. She thought if she could prove you were untrustworthy, I would end it before you hurt me. And you believed that? Yes. He looked at the floor. For 5 years, I believed that. I leaned against the counter. What changed? He ran a hand through his hair. She did it again. There it was. The pattern. She accused someone else. My business partner. Said he was stealing. I checked this time, and he wasn't. I nodded slowly. And that made you question the past? Yes. He looked up at me. I found the old transaction logs. The IP address. It was from her laptop. I remembered standing in the bank office, holding the printed report, begging him to look at it. He hadn't. Now he had. 5 years too late. Why are you here, Daniel? I asked quietly. He hesitated. Then he told me. After our divorce, he and Marissa grew closer. She helped him manage finances. She gave advice about investments. He trusted her with everything 2 years ago. He opened a small hardware supply company with a partner. It grew quickly. Marissa insisted on helping with bookkeeping last year. Money started disappearing. He believed her when she blamed the partner. He almost sued him. This time something felt off. He hired an accountant. The accountant found irregular transfers, all routed through Marissa's device. Over $80,000 gone when confronted. She admitted it, not maliciously, she claimed. Just temporary loans. He reported it. There was an investigation. Charges were filed. Marissa was now facing fraud allegations. The news spread quickly in their town, and suddenly, 5 years ago, did not look the same anymore. You ruined your marriage over $5,000? I said calmly. Double quotes, yes. And she took $80,000 from you. He closed his eyes briefly. Yes. Does that make you feel better? No. Good. I wasn't cruel. I was honest. He nodded. I deserved that. He looked around the bakery again. I heard about this place from someone at the courthouse. The courthouse? I'm selling the house. The one I had painted walls in. The one I had planted tomatoes behind. The one I left at 3 a.m. Why? I asked. I can't afford it alone anymore. So the life he protected had crumbled. Not dramatically, gradually. I didn't come here to ask for anything, he said quickly. I just needed to see you, to say I was wrong. You deserved better. Those words felt strange. 5 years ago, I would have cried hearing them. Now they felt like information, nothing more. I did deserve better, I said, and you have it now. Yes. He looked at me carefully. Are you happy? I considered that happiness is not constant, but peace. Peace I had. Yes, I said. I'm happy. He nodded slowly. I'm glad. He moved toward the door, then paused. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't know it, I replied. He accepted that and left. But that was not the end, because small towns talk, and within a week, everyone knew about Marissa, about the fraud, about Daniel's business losses, and about me, the bakery owner who used to be his wife. People came in with curiosity, with sympathy, with questions. I answered none of them. I did not gossip. I did not explain. My life was not a public spectacle. It was a structure I built carefully. 3 weeks later, something happened I did not expect. Daniel came back. But not alone. He stood in line like everyone else. And behind him were two men in suits, court officials. I recognized one from the courthouse downtown. When he reached the counter, he said quietly, "We need to serve you something." My stomach tightened. He slid a folder across the counter. Subpoena. Marissa's defense attorney had listed me as a witness. Because of the original $5,000 accusation, they wanted to question me. About the divorce. About the alleged financial betrayal. My name was part of the official case now. I looked at Daniel. He looked ashamed. "I didn't know they were doing this," he said. "It doesn't matter," I replied. It did matter, but not in the way it once would have. The trial was scheduled. 2 months later, I received official documents, requests for records, bank statements, old emails, everything for 5 years. I had tried to move forward now. The past was demanding to be reviewed publicly. At first I felt tired, then I felt something else. Clarity. This was not revenge, this was truth catching up. And truth, as I had learned, is patient. On the day of the hearing, I wore a simple navy dress. Nothing dramatic, nothing theatrical. I walked into the courthouse alone. Daniel was already seated. Marissa sat beside her. Lawyer. She looked smaller than I remembered her. Confidence was gone. When she saw me, her jaw tightened, but she did not smile. The prosecutor called my name. I walked to the stand. 5 years ago, I had stood in this same building holding divorce papers. Now, I stood holding documentation, bank logs, IP traces, printed reports that confirmed what I had said all along. I did not embellish. I did not accuse. I simply answered questions. Yes, no, that is correct. When asked if I had stolen the $5,000, I said clearly, no. The forensic report confirmed the transfer came from a device linked to the defendant. The courtroom was quiet. Marissa did not look at me. Daniel did not either. The judge reviewed the evidence. The pattern was clear. This was not a misunderstanding. It was intentional. Manipulation, and it had history. The verdict did not come that day, but the narrative changed publicly, officially. The woman once labeled financially untrustworthy was now recorded as falsely accused, and the sister, who wouldn't lie, was facing fraud charges that evening. I returned to the bakery. I did not celebrate. I opened the doors at 4 a.m. the next morning like always, because vindication is not a party. It is quiet. A week later, Daniel came again. This time he did not ask to talk. He stood in line, ordered coffee, paid before leaving. He said one thing. I see it now. What? Who she was? Who you were? Who I was? I nodded, and that was enough. The verdict came on a Monday morning. I was pulling sourdough from the oven when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Normally I let those go to voicemail. That day, I answered. This is the clerk's office, the woman said. The ruling has been entered. My grip tightened slightly on the oven mitt. Marissa was found guilty of financial fraud. Restitution ordered. Probation. Mandatory. Financial oversight. No prison time but a permanent mark on record. Public documented 5 years ago. My name had been marked in divorce paperwork as financially deceptive. Now hers would be. There was no celebration, no dramatic satisfaction, just confirmation. Truth had finished its slow walk. The town reacted exactly how small towns do. Quiet whispers, side conversations at grocery stores. People suddenly remembering details they once ignored. I noticed something subtle. When customers looked at me now, there was something different in their eyes. Respect, not because I won, because I endured. Endurance is louder than revenge. 3 days after the verdict, Daniel came to the bakery before opening. He knocked on the door at 4:45 a.m. I was already there, flour on my hands, radio playing softly. I unlocked it. He stepped inside. No coffee order this time. No small talk. She's moving out of town, he said. I urged. She won't speak to me. That makes sense. He nodded. I'm not here because of her. Then why? He hesitated. Then he said something I didn't expect. I'm selling the hardware business. Why? I don't trust my judgment anymore. That sentence told me everything. He had finally seen the pattern, not just in her, in himself. He had trusted without verifying, believed without questioning, protected pride over partnership, and it cost him. I came to ask you something, he said. I waited. Do you think people can change? The question was honest, not defensive, not manipulative, just unsure. Yes, I said, but not because they want forgiveness, because they want integrity. He swallowed. And if someone realizes too late, then they live with that. Silence settled between us again, not hostile, just real. He looked around the bakery one more time. You built all this after I told you to leave? Yes, I thought you wouldn't make it on your own. I know. He nodded slowly. That's the part that keeps me awake. Good. Some truths should. I'm not asking for us back, he said quickly. I'm not offering, I replied. Calmly, a faint smile touched his face. Fair. He looked relieved in a strange way. Closure does not always mean reunion. Sometimes it means acceptance. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small, an envelope. I found this when I cleaned out the house. He handed it to me. I recognized my handwriting immediately. It was the letter I had left on the kitchen table the night I packed. He must have found it behind a drawer or under furniture. I opened it carefully. The words were shaky, but clear. Did not take the money. I love you. I hope one day you choose to believe me. 5 years ago, that letter felt desperate. Now it felt distant. He watched my face as I read it. I never read it, he said quietly. I know, he nodded. I should have you. Another silence. But this one was softer. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said. You don't need to repeat that, I replied. He exhaled slowly. I just needed you to know that I finally see it. All of it. I believe you. That surprised him. You do? Yes. Why? Because you didn't defend yourself this time. You admitted it. He absorbed that, and something in his shoulders relaxed. I'm leaving town next month, he said. Where? Smaller place. Fresh start. That's good. He nodded. I won't come back here again. I don't want to complicate your life. That's considerate. A faint, sad smile. He moved toward the door, then paused. I'm proud of you, he said. Those words landed differently than they once would have. They did not validate me. They acknowledged reality. Thank you, I said. And this time, when he walked out, I did not feel abandoned. I felt finished. A week later, Marissa came. I did not expect that. It was mid-morning. The bakery was busy. She stood in line quietly. No makeup, no confident posture. Just you. And when she reached the counter, she looked at me directly. Can we talk? She asked. I considered saying no, but I said, after closing. At 6:15, she sat at the same table Daniel had. The symmetry was not lost on me. She clasped her hands tightly. I don't want sympathy, she began. I don't have any to give. She nodded. I wanted control, she said. I know. I thought if I kept him close, I wouldn't lose him. You lost him anyway? Yes. Her voice cracked slightly. I didn't think it would go this far. It did. Silence. I was jealous of you, she admitted. Why? You were calm, secure. He loved you without needing me. There it was, the root. Thought, not money, not suspicion. Fear. Fear disguised as protection. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she said. Good. I just needed to say it out loud. She stood. I hope you keep this place forever, she added softly. I plan to. She left without another word. I watched her walk down the street, smaller, not defeated, just exposed. The months that followed were ordinary, which is exactly how healing should feel. Ordinary Daniel moved away. Marissa disappeared from town. The gossip faded. The bakery continued. Morning rush, afternoon lull, holiday orders, staff, birthdays, real life, steady. One Sunday morning, I stood outside the bakery before opening. Sunlight hit the windows just right. Warm golden dot. I remembered the diner booth at 4 a.m. 5 years ago. The motel room, the divorce papers, the humiliation, the doubt, and I realized something simple. If Daniel had believed me that night, I would not be here. I would not own this place. I would not have discovered what I was capable of alone. Pain is not a gift, but it can be a direction. I unlocked the door. The bell rang as it always did. First customer walked in. Morning, Alina. Morning. Normal. Simple. Mind that. Afternoon, I sat in my tiny office in the back and opened a folder labeled Old. Inside were copies of the forensic report, divorce decree, the unopened letter returned. Years ago, I looked at them for a moment. Then I placed them in a box, not because I was erasing the past, but because I no longer needed to hold it so tightly. There is a difference between remembering and carrying. I chose remembering. People sometimes ask me what the best revenge is. They expect something dramatic, something destructive. I tell them the truth. The best revenge is competence. The best revenge is stability. The best revenge is building something so solid that the people who doubted you have to stand in line to see it. Not because you forced them, because life brought them there. 5 years ago, I walked out of a house at 3 a.m. with a suitcase and $213 today. I lock up a bakery I built with my own hands. I pay my employees fairly. I sleep without doubt. I do not check anyone's phone. I do not need anyone's validation. And when I look in the mirror, I do not see the woman who was accused. I see the woman who kept going. This story is not about Daniel. It is not about Marissa. It is not about fraud. It is about choice. The night he told me to leave, I had two options: break, or build. Built, and that made all the difference. If you are in the middle of something unfair right now, if someone has already decided you are guilty, if you are packing a suitcase at 3 a.m., wondering what you did wrong, remember this: you do not need everyone to believe you. You only need yourself to keep moving. The truth does not rush, but it arrives. And when it does, you will not need revenge. You will need peace, and peace is stronger. My name is Alina Carter. I am 31 years old. 5 years ago, my husband told me to leave before sunrise. Last month, he stood in line at my counter and paid for cinnamon rolls. Not because I planned it, because life completed the circle. And I chose to stand in the center of it, still, unshaken, whole.